happened in KFC.
Oh my
Don't try
God.
to go around the story.
Alice, Alice. So we're going for a walk and we're like, oh, let's go get some dinner. Walk into KFC. And all of a sudden I'm like, Delano, no, for real now. These contractions are getting really bad. He was like, what level pain are you? I was like, I'm level 7 to 8. He was like, oh my gosh. And I was like to the guy, can you please hurry up the food? Can you please hurry up the food? We've actually got to leave right now. And Delano was like to the guy, please hurry up the food. Why didn't we just leave without the food? No, my guilt was
It's
more like,
you. You didn't want to leave without the food.
who wants to leave without the food? I was like, make sure the food comes. Leave the KFC restaurant. Walking. My water's broke in the middle of the street. Literally, that is what happened. All for some KFC. I think it is essential for them to provide support for dads. So in both of these experiences, dads have been front and present in both of our experiences the whole entire time. Sometimes helpless, mostly helpless, lack of information to them. And also, they are not doctors or midwives or doulas. They are dads. So it's going to be a very different experience. I think they need support prior, and I think they need support during, and I think they need support after. And I do think that they have their own traumatic stories to tell as they are watching the one person that they love in the world trying to deliver another person who they love just as much and will love just as much, and they're torn between the two. You know, I want my wife or my partner to come through this happy and healthy, and also I want to have a baby at the end of it as well to take home. I think for fathers we underestimate how much trauma can be involved in them being present during that experience. Welcome to this after school club enrichment episode of Pulling an All-Nighter podcast. I'm Margaret and this is Exon.
And I'm Alice, and this is Zariah.
If you have not listened to our bonus Getting to Know Us episode, which explains all about our podcast, I recommend you listen to it now. In summary, Pulling an All-Nighter is all about life, parenting, having a career, surviving on very little sleep, current affairs, and we do really good product reviews. Each episode is brought to you from our home with special guest appearances from our little ones and sometimes a special expert. Our shows mimic and replicate the school academic year and school term times, of which there are 3, the summer term, spring term and autumn term. In other words, year end, which is usually in April, summer holidays and Christmas. Because this is a special after school club enrichment episode, we recommend you not listen to this with anyone over the age of 14 months. Maybe listen to this when you're pulling an all-nighter. We also recommend this has a trigger warning. We will be talking about birth, labour and potentially some traumatic experiences. This episode is all about the birth trauma inquiry, which is led by Theo, Clarke MP, Rosie, Duffield MP, and was set up with the aim of finding out more about the experiences of women who have been affected by traumatic birth. Alice, this was one that you really wanted to talk about, and you recommended that we talk about. So over to you to kind of start.
Thanks. The reason why I wanted us to really touch on this topic is because we are 2 women who have experienced birth ourselves. We've had, I'd say we've each had at least one traumatic labouring experience between the 5 children that we've had. And I also feel like it's a conversation that's been around for a really long time, particularly around Black and brown women, around birth, trauma, difficult experiences during labour. And I just thought I just wanted to kind of talk about it because it's something that has been a conversation between black and brown women, like I said, for a really long time.
Tory
And
MP Theo Clarke. She
yeah,
is the chair of the inquiry. So in an emotional speech that she gave in the House of Commons in October 2023, Miss Clarke broke down as she described being rushed into an emergency surgery after the birth of her daughter. She was terrified she was going to die, and she bled really heavily after suffering a third degree tear. And had to undergo 2-hour surgery without general anesthetic because she already had an epidural. So this inquiry spoke to over 1,300 women. So there was an overwhelming response to the inquiry and the request for women to come forward. The inquiry into the childbirth trauma actually recommends an overhaul of the UK's maternity and postnatal care after finding poor care is all too frequently tolerated as normal. So women complained that they weren't being listened to when they felt something was wrong. They were mocked or shouted at and denied the basics such as pain relief. And there were marginalised women, as you've mentioned, women of ethnic minority groups, and brown, black women, Asian women who felt that there was racism towards them during that very important part of giving birth. And it's actually estimated that 30,000 women a year in the UK alone have suffered negative experiences during delivery. And as we said, between the two of us, 5 children, we've both experienced some sort of traumatic, negative childbirth experience. But I have to say, my first time round, me being pregnant the first time round, I was skipping to the hospital. I had overall, I had an amazing experience from childbirth. So
yeah.
I don't want people listening to this to think, oh, all brown and black women are having the worst births in the world. Like none of them are happy. They're all traumatized and crying. I had a brilliant experience, but that doesn't reflect the overall experiences of what women are experiencing, as all women are, but also women of ethnic groups. If you are listening to this and you have not had your first child yet, have a think whether you want to listen to this now. The stories we're going to tell are not horrific stories. However, I do think it's important to talk to somebody before you listen to this podcast, and talk to someone about traumatic birth before you listen to this podcast, and also think about your birth plan, but also not to be frightened by it. Every woman's experience is different. And also to just do your research, do your reading, get people around you. And I think before you listen to this podcast, that's the advice I would say. Get people around you who have some positive birth experiences, but also get people around you who've had challenging ones. And they don't need to go into in-depth detail about it. That is not necessary for a woman who's about to give birth. But having people around you who can guide you, advise you, mentor you, advocate for you is what we really recommend that you do before. The birth trauma inquiry really focuses on traumatic experiences of women who have given birth here in the UK. And I think it is probably just worth talking about our births, actually. And before we start talking about our births, we'll give you because between the two of us, we've had 5 kids. It's probably just giving highlights about our births, what was really good about it, maybe some advice that we would give and tips. And how they were all very, very different, and how we felt after it, and how important I think this inquiry is for women, not just in the UK but for all over the world, and how the UK's perspective, and how the UK is actually going to take it forward, moving forward, for all those women out there who either had children already, not had any children, planning to have children. So I think it's probably worth you starting talking about Malachi's birth, and maybe a bit about your pregnancy as well.
So with Malachi, Malachi was born in 2018. Full term pregnancy. And when I was pregnant with him, I had high blood pressure as well. So I had high blood pressure prior to him, so I was aware. So I had to do a whole kind of review. They changed my medication and everything else with the doctor. So the rest of my pregnancy was absolutely fine. It was really smooth. But I think for me, one thing I had was I had an irrational fear of miscarrying for no reason, no particular reason. I was just a very nervous person when pregnant. Didn't know what to expect, and I just felt like actually I put off buying anything for him. I put off buying. Don't know if you remember. I put off buying pretty much everything until I was about 8.5, 9 months pregnant, because I would just. Yeah, I was just worried for no reason, clearly, but I just had fear.
But I don't want to say you were worried for no reason. I feel like it's a rational fear. Women lose pregnancy, they lose babies, they have miscarriages. It is just a fear that you had during pregnancy. I think we all have different types of fear during pregnancy.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's fair, actually. And I'm sure that there's loads of women out there who probably go and it doesn't even cross their mind. But for me, yeah, that was just one thing that always hung over my head. So we had our pregnancy. We had the plan of what I wanted. I wanted a natural, I'm putting that in air quotes because all labour, all birth is natural, but I wanted a vaginal delivery. I'll be specific. So I wanted a vaginal delivery, and that's just what I wanted. I just felt like actually that's what works for me. Yeah, so that was kind of all part of the plan. So I remember when I had to be induced. So I had to be induced as part of the reason being was because I had high blood pressure. So they felt like actually let's assist him to come out on time. So I was 40 plus by the time they decided to induce me. And I remember going to the hospital thinking, oh, I'm just going to be induced and he's going to be here like within a day. That was not the case. So went into hospital, they started the drip and everything else for the induction. I remember specifically my husband and I going to the canteen, and me getting a hot chocolate, and I felt like so much pressure, and suddenly my waters broke in the middle of the canteen.
But this was like day 3 in the hospital.
Yeah,
right?
this was day 3. Yes, it took ages. And then the waters broke. So we were all there naive thinking, great, the baby's going to come within the next hour. Wrong. So we went back to my room thinking, oh, everyone's going to rush us through and we're going to get moving. No, it took another full day and a half before he came. It took forever. So by then you'd come down as well, and you were also in the room with me. And at the time, I was also very much, I'm going to have a natural delivery. I want no pain relief. I want nothing. I just want gas and air. I started off on gas and air, and it just was not for me. It just wasn't working. And I remember when you were when you were about to be induced as well, and I just said to you, and there's a difference between going into labour naturally and being induced labour. And induction labour, their pains come on so much stronger and so much faster that no one actually tells you that. It's very different, because it's a manufactured labour ultimately. So it feels very different, and it's a lot more intense. It's a lot stronger, which I wasn't aware of. So I was thinking, I don't want anything. I don't want anything at all. No one touch me. No one give me pain relief. And I remember a few minutes in, I just thought, you know what? Give me everything. Give me everything now. Just dump it all on my head and give it to me now. So I remember screaming for an epidural because I just had enough and it was just too much pain. And finally, the doctor coming in, giving me the epidural. Labouring again for hours and hours. Pain was coming and going. It was just it went on for a really long time. And then a few minutes and then not too long after, so they have the monitor over my tummy just to check baby's heartbeat, making sure everything's okay. And then all I remember was suddenly the midwife, so we had a change in midwife, so a new midwife came in to the room, and she was kind of doing her obs and checking me over and stuff like that. Lovely, all was fine. About an hour after she arrived, she suddenly said, "Oh gosh," and by then everyone was calm, the room was silent. I feel like we were half asleep, everyone was half asleep, and suddenly she just flipped on the lights and just went, "The heartbeat has dropped." Didn't say anything else, slapped a massive red button, and the room filled with about 14, 15 people.
Yeah.
A lot of talking, and I was suddenly just whisked away and told that I was having an emergency C-section because Malachi's heart rate had dropped. And that was
Tolu
out of
didn't
this
even
scary.
Tolu didn't even have time to put his scrubs on. It was literally like she smashed on the emergency thing, everybody rushed in, nobody really explained anything. They pulled you out of the room. Tolu was still trying to put his scrubs on, and then literally you were whisked away, and that was it. And then the next thing we heard, it was just like, oh, the midwife came in, and she was like, oh, she'll be okay, she'll be okay. And at this point I called Mum, and I was like, Mum, pray for Alice, she's got like an emergency C-section. And it was just, and then it was like, oh yeah, the baby's arrived, and yeah, it was just literally within minutes then you've given birth.
Yeah. And obviously I was placed under anesthesia, so I wasn't awake during the C-section or anything. And I came around, I don't even know how long after, and was wheeled back to the room, and the baby was there with my husband and Margaret. So that's my first labour. So you have all these plans about what you feel like it's going to look like, and then for it just to completely go sideways. Obviously you never know what's going to happen on the day, but with that experience, it was just really scary. We didn't know what was going on. Of course they don't have enough time to explain everything, but it's still scary when you think it's going one way and then you're suddenly whisked off, and you're sedated and wake up the next minute. And also we didn't know whether we were having a boy or a girl at a time. So we didn't know what we were having. The plan was I'd deliver, and then Tolly would be at the end and say, oh, it's a boy or it's a girl. I remember just coming round and the lady just saying, oh, wonderful, you've come back round. We're going to take you round. You've had a son. He's with your husband. We'll take you back round. And I was like, oh, okay, I've had a boy. Wonderful. But it all felt really surreal. So yeah, and I think we can laugh about it, and I can laugh about it as well now, but at the time it was really just scary because that was the first time any of us had been in that position, and none of us knew what was going on. None of us would have known what to do, or what questions to ask or anything like that. So that was my experience. And a year later you then had your experience with Xavier. What was yours like?
So just before I tell my one, the research that has been done shows that about 4 to 5% of women develop post-traumatic stress syndrome after traumatic births, which you think 4 to 5% isn't really much, but actually the equivalent of 25,000 to 30 women in the UK every year potentially develop post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of traumatic birth. So I do think that it is a lot of women who have a story like yours, who've gone into labour, and experienced similar things. So for my first birth, I was, really blessed, really lucky, really fortunate. The hospital had a really good process going through it. Because I was 38 or 36, I can't remember, I was considered old. I wasn't considered high risk, but I was kind of within the risk factors. They do your blood pressure, etc. So I had low pressure, and there wasn't any sign that was considered risky at that point. And went into the hospital, Midwives were absolutely amazing. I had my birth plan. I wanted a water birth, but I couldn't have a water birth because I had to be induced, just like you, induced. So I was
Mm.
induced. So I was expecting to be in the hospital for a few days. Contractions started on Monday. And then waters broke on the Wednesday eventually, and then baby arrived on the Friday morning. So this was like a week long delivery process. Induced on the Wednesday, I think. After my waters broke, I was sent home and then told to come back on the Thursday. And then because no progression had happened since the Wednesday to the Thursday, I was induced, and then that took another day or so. And then, like you, I was like, oh, I don't want pain relief. I don't want pain relief. But that artificial pain that they give you using the drip is real. I was literally like screaming, give me. But I love the hospital I went to. When they said they're going to induce me, she okay?
Yeah.
When they said they're going to induce me, they said, we're going to get the anaesthetist to come and talk to you. I was like, really? The anaesthetist to talk to? I was like, okay. So the anaesthetist was like, if you need me, let me know. Here's a form, la 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 la. So when I did need my girl, I was all like, get the anaesthetist back in there. I need her. Got an epidural, everything was going fine. And you know what? Really calm, relaxed labor. You were there, pushed baby out. It was a wonderful experience. Absolutely brilliant. Now, fast forward 4 years later, and my experience was very, very different. I was
Mm.
older. I was now considered high risk because I was 39. Um, and they did all these tests. Even though my blood pressure was low, there was no other factors saying that I was high risk. Basically, I was just considered an old lady. And because of that, it was like, right, you're high risk. And immediately, I think they were all like, well, I think we're going to do a C-section. And I was like, so I was like, I don't want a C-section. In the end, I had to be, long story short, but there was some research being conducted by the hospital about women and having babies before your due date. So I was encouraged to have the baby on my due date. I didn't want to have it on my due date. I was like, let nature take its course. Then it was like, oh,
Mm.
come in and let's induce you early. No, I don't want to be induced early. Oh, come in, let's do a sweep. No, I don't want to sweep. Just let nature take its course. If I'm 2 weeks over, if I'm a week over, surely that's fine. No, you're high risk. No, I'm not high risk because just because I'm 39 and show no other signs, I'm not high risk. Either way, in the end, I went in for a sweep a week after my due date, and baby didn't like the sweep. Baby's blood pressure high, heart rate went down. Then they didn't let me go home. Cool. So then they wanted to induce me. I was like, look, the baby's absolutely fine. 24 hours later, I'm still in the hospital. The baby's absolutely fine. Still in my tummy. Nothing's going on. This baby's like, no, no, we'll go home. No, no, not going to let you go home. So the doctor was like, you've got 2 ways of leaving this hospital. Get an epidural or get an epidural. Like, no, sorry. Get induced or get induced. That's the only way you're going to leave this hospital. And I think it's really important when I'm telling this story that it goes back to medical intervention. It looks like that's the way it's going at the moment. A lot of medical
Mm.
intervention, doctors not wanting to take any risks, midwives. I barely saw a midwife. I saw a lot of doctors, but very few midwives on the ward. In the end, I was eventually induced after I was just like, this is a losing battle. If the doctor tells me I need to be induced to leave this hospital, that's what I'm going to take. So I just felt like there were no choices at this point.
Mm.
Then I was induced. Then we went out for a walk that evening, and then my contractions were really, really bad. I came back. We went out for a walk. Came back from the walk, and then I was in so severe pain.
No, 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 no. You can't. You can't just skip over. Went out for a walk. Where did you go?
We went KFC.
That
We
was the
went to
vital part of the
KFC.
story. Don't skip around that bit because what happened in KFC?
Oh my
Don't try
God.
to skip around the story.
Alice, Alice. So we're going for a walk and we're like, oh, let's go get some dinner. Walk into KFC. And all of a sudden I'm like, Delano, no, for real now. These contractions are getting really bad. He was like, what level pain are you? I was like, I'm level 7 to 8. He was like, oh my gosh. And I was like to the guy, can you please hurry up the food? Can you please hurry up the food? We've actually got to leave right now. And Delano was like to the guy, please hurry up the food. Why didn't we just leave without the food? No, my guilt was
It's
more like,
you didn't want to leave without the food.
who wants to leave without the food? I was like, make sure the food comes. Leave the KFC restaurant. Walking. My water's broke in the middle of the street. Literally, that is what happened. All for some KFC. Come out of KFC, water's break, and get to the hospital. I'm screaming for pain relief at this point. I'm just like, I need pain relief. Um, oh, the pessary's still in there, which is what they used to induce me. The pessary's still in there, so we have to take the pessary out. I was like, I really need pain relief. I'm now on the floor screaming for pain. I can give you a paracetamol. I was like, babe, this isn't the kind of pain we're talking about. We're talking about level 10 pain. I'm on the floor screaming. Delano's like, please get my wife some pain relief. No pain
And
relief.
and to be fair, you've got a very high pain
Please.
threshold as
Thank
well.
you.
You've got so when I know that you're saying 10, it's probably more than a 10. But you can only kind of say 10, but I know you've let it go past more than a 10.
Right. So I'm screaming, please can I have pain relief? And they're all like, oh, we have to take the pessary out first. Then we have to get you paracetamol. Then the head nurse has to come. I'm like, so at this point I'm doing deep breaths, like deep breaths. And Delano's just like, and then they were like, okay, and also you don't give birth on this ward, you give birth upstairs on the other ward. I was like, okay, so can we get to the other ward? Oh, but you can't go there right now because we need to get you a bed. There's no bed right now. No, there's no bed right now. I was like, okay. And even if you want to get to that bed, we need to give you transport. We need to get you a wheelchair. Okay, so can I have a wheelchair then? Yeah, okay, we've called for a wheelchair, but the porter's not here yet. Alice, what felt like a lifetime, it was like 10, 15 minutes. At this point, I'm still tracking my contractions. Then I'm like, I give up. Somebody else track the contractions.
Mm.
Then,
And then didn't Delano then say, "Oh, he'll just carry you up there," and they're
no,
like, "No, that's against health and
Delano's like,
safety or
I will
whatever." Delano's
carry.
just like, just find a way to get her up there.
Right.
Yeah.
I will carry my wife upstairs. So they're like, oh, health and safety means you can't carry her up there. In my head, I was just like, oh my God, screaming for pain relief. So then they finally take the pessary out, which should stop the contractions, but they didn't. I was now full blown contractions. How many centimeters am I? 3. At this point, I'm like, oh no, this has just begun. So I'm like, okay, can I have an epidural now? And what I think the whole point of this birth story is because if you've had one before, you kind of know what to expect. I can't imagine if that was my experience for a first birth. That I was
Mm.
like, nobody's there advising me. Okay, I would expect the midwife or the doctor to be like, okay, this is what's going to happen next. This is what's going to happen next. This is the process. No, I was the one saying, okay, now I need an epidural. Now I need pain relief. Now I need a sedative.
Mm.
Now I need gas and air. No, I need somebody to advocate for me. I am not the doctor or the
Absolutely.
midwife. I am not that. That's not my role. Either way, porter still doesn't show up. They then have to press the emergency button to get a porter to come. Eventually, a porter comes and they take me in a bed upstairs to deliver the baby. Okay, now that they give me, now she just hands me gas and she's given me paracetamol, by the way, which I'm so grateful for. Then they give me gas and air. Don't explain to me how to use it. I'm literally like, then I start hallucinating, people. I'm like, can you believe this is not even funny? But this is Delano. You start hallucinating about work, asking people to write a report.
What?
Really?
I
Really?
didn't know that.
Your girl is like, where the deadline's about to hit, guys. Please write this report. I need this report submitted. Da 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 da. I start hallucinating about work of all the things.
Of all
Anyway,
things.
they find that quite hilarious in that moment. And then they're trying to take the gas and air away from me. So I clamped my mouth around it and I'm like, God, get the gas and air. They eventually rip out my mouth. Then, like, there's 20 midwives and doctors in the room because the pain isn't stopping and they don't know what to do. Or they know what to do. But eventually, I say, okay, please, can I have an epidural? Finally, the anaesthetist comes. Oh, okay, so now imagine I'm screaming in pain, asking for pain relief. Screaming, screaming, screaming. And then the anaesthetist like, so I just need to explain to you what the process is. You need to, like, give us consent.
This is a thing about the anaesthetists as well. They come, and I feel bad for them
I
sometimes
do.
because they come at the wrong time because you've come now when I needed it about 15 minutes ago. I was calmer then. Now you've arrived 15 minutes later and I've lost it now and I can't take it anymore. You talking calmly and explaining the process. I don't have time for that. Just jab me and get it done.
Alice, Delano was like, this poor guy has probably seen 20 women in this situation. The man came in tired, tired. Either way, when Maz was trying to give me my epidural, I'm screaming, I'm scratching, etc. Scratch the anaesthetist. I'm like, okay, then I'm like, I'm so sorry, I scratched the anaesthetist. Then I calm down. Pain is now gone after the epidural. Cool. Then they're like, but the baby's not happy. The baby's heartbeat's gone down. We're rushing you now. I was like, no, I do not want an emergency C-section. The baby is absolutely fine. So now I'm calm. I'm calm, but they're not calm. And they're all like, no, we've got to rush you in. I was like, you've just checked the baby. And this whole time, by the way, they haven't checked the baby. Then they start checking the baby. Oh, we're not happy with the baby's heart rate. I said, everybody needs to just calm down. I need to calm down. I need to switch positions. I need to do this. The baby's absolutely fine. No, we're going in. We're going in. I was like, I don't want a C-section. I don't want a C-section. I don't want an emergency C-section. I don't want an emergency C-section. No, we're rushing you in. We're rushing you in. And that is where I feel like I wasn't listened to. I wasn't listened to from the moment I started saying I wanted pain relief, because that never came until 20 minutes
Mm.
later. So then they do the emergency C-section. Baby's absolutely fine. The same with you, remember, when Malachi was born. They were like, babes was asleep in there. The same with Exon. When she was born, absolutely calm and absolutely fine. They were like, oh, we'll have to look into why we rushed you in for an emergency C-section, because it seems like after we've done it, the baby was absolutely fine. And in my head, I was just like fuming. I was actually really fuming and really
Yeah.
upset. And I was upset because I felt like I wasn't listened to. I felt like nobody was in control of the situation. I felt like the midwives were not in control of the situation. I felt like the pain relief. And you know what, Alice? I had such a good birth the first time round. The second time round, they didn't even ask me for a birth plan. I didn't even write a birth plan. Nobody does all that stuff anymore. Maybe because they've just realised birth plans don't work and they need to find something else. But I felt like it was not the best experience. And I cried for days and days and days after.
Mm.
And also, I was upset for days and days and days after. They did recommend, so this is the one thing I would say about whatever experiences, get talking therapy afterwards. So they did recommend for me to sit with the person who had my notes, to read my notes over with me, go through how it happened, what I wasn't happy about, etc. So I fully recommend, my top tip, if you had a traumatic experience, get them to get your notes out, show you your notes and talk you through your notes with somebody
Mhm.
who is a professional, and get some talking therapy. My healthcare person who came after was absolutely fantastic. She talked to me, she listened to me. All of them came and they were all just like, they raised eyebrows about the process that was gone through. And I think it's just important for women out there to do that. So yeah, that was number two of my experiences. But I also know that Ezreal and Zariah were also very different as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, with Ezreal,
Baby number
once
two. Yeah.
yeah, baby number two. Once again, it was an induction again. So with him, I was induced. This was during COVID time as well. So I was in the hospital for, I think to start with, I was in the hospital for about 3 days. Tolu wasn't able to come. I wasn't allowed any visitors or anything like that. So I was on my own. If anyone did come, I'd have to leave the hospital ward, go outside and see them, and then come back into the hospital ward, because husbands weren't allowed to come into the hospital until you were actual in active labour at that time. So Ez was born in 2020, so this was during August 2020. So the pandemic officially started around March. So we're a few months into the pandemic and what it's looking like now. So so husbands were now allowed, because before that, husbands weren't even allowed into the delivery room. So now they're allowing them in, but it was when you're actually in active labour. So I was in the hospital for about 3 or 4 days this time. Initially nothing happening, was induced, just kind of bobbing around on my ball, kind of trying to get him moving and getting something happening. So kind of jump ahead into when I went into active labour. Tolu, I told Tolu that it was kind of happening, so he came down. We weren't too far. He came down, and I do remember that during that time I was my cervix was opening it was very slow, let's say. So I wasn't kind of going at a really fast pace. It was taking quite a while for me to kind of get to 10 centimeters. So and what I found was a lot of the time the doctors that were coming in were very much, if you're not 10 centimeters by this time, we're going to have a C-section. You're going to have a C. So it was very much each time kind of, I don't want to say threatening, but it felt very much, if you don't do this, then we're just gonna do it for you. So there wasn't that kind of care, that patience, that kind of just waiting and seeing what my body would do. There wasn't.
The point is, when you say you don't want to use the word threatening, but when in your heightened sense of having a baby, anyone saying to you, if you've not done it by this time, of course it feels like a threat. Your emotions are high, your hormones are high. I just don't feel like that's the most appropriate language to say, guys, we're on a clock here.
And exactly. So it felt very much like we're on a clock. So, and I understand the whole thing of we're on a clock because we don't want baby to be in distress, but baby wasn't in distress. Everyone, the room was calm. My body was just taking a bit longer just to kind of get there. So eventually I got to 10 centimeters and it was just like, okay, it's time to push. So I was pushing, but obviously when you're pushing, you need the guy. I'd had an epidural by then as well, so you can't feel anything down there. You don't know what's going on. So we'd started the pushing and there wasn't much happening with the pushing. Baby wasn't coming out, and the same doctor then came in and said, right, we're gonna kind of start moving to having a C-section now. And there was this one doctor who happens to be the head of them all, and I don't know if she was passing or if she just happened to pop her head in and just do a check, but she was my absolute angel on that day. And I'm going to reference the fact that she was a black woman as well, because everybody else in that room were white, and that's absolutely fine, but she was the one black woman who was in that room with me who actually listened to what I wanted. And listen to the fact that I did not want an emergency. I didn't want a C-section. So at the time I was saying again, I don't want a C-section. I would like to deliver naturally. Everyone was still very calm. Then the woman then stepped in and said, okay, I'm going to take you through to the theatre and we're going to try and deliver this baby and we will try a different method. So she was just like, we're going to give you assistance. So I was like, okay, brilliant. She was so calm, she was so kind, and she listened. So she took me through to the theatre. We all went through to the theatre and we used, so it was, they either used forceps or suction. So she was like, let's use suction. So obviously still can't feel anything down there. So I needed the guidance to tell me when to push, when the contractions were coming, so I knew when I really need to give it a lot of welly and when to kind of relax when nothing was happening. And she literally guided me through it, and told me exactly when to push, when to relax. She coached me and just said to me, Alice, you keep stopping when I've not told you to stop. She was so calm and was just like, I need you to keep pushing until I tell you to stop. Don't stop. She completely coached me through that delivery. I was able to have a vaginal delivery through her her help through suction, and just through her actually just listening to me and taking control of the situation. And like you said, it goes back to what you said before. There needed to be someone who took control, and she actually stepped in, listened, but took control of that situation and was able to deliver my baby the
But
way
what I
I'd wanted to.
exactly the way you'd wanted to, but also there's difference between coming in and taking control of a situation and being like, right, the control is you're having a
Yeah, you're
C-section,
not listening.
not listening, not reading the room, and not
Mm,
watching. We like there's plenty of people who can come in and take control of a situation and just do it their own way, rather than taking control of the situation and understanding the mum's needs, the mum's requirements, and weighing that up against all the other risks in the room and all the other
absolutely.
situations that are going on. And I do not envy medical professionals who are doctors, gynecologists, midwives, anyone who, anaesthetists, anyone who's doing delivery at this point. I don't envy them. I get that there
Mm,
are risky situations, but I also think that there are ways to handle it that supports women and doesn't leave the women
absolutely.
broken at the end of that process. And I do think,
100.
like you said, I think we've mentioned this word before, an advocate for you. In those
Mm,
situations, you cannot advocate for yourself. You cannot fight for yourself. You cannot always communicate what you want and how you feel.
mm,
And I think it's really important that somebody there is fighting your battle for you, and obviously taking into consideration your health, your well-being, your baby's health and well-being. All we want is a positive outcome, but sometimes
absolutely.
it's the journey and the risks that go through that process. So, as sorry, you were saying, so she took control of the situation.
Yeah. And but you're right though as well around having someone to advocate and take control, but in a way that is actually beneficial to everybody as well. So that's absolutely right. And I was able to deliver my son, Ezreal, on that occasion through just plainly through her. And I feel like she was the only person in that room who weighed everything up and listened to me and actually listened to my feelings as well, and didn't push me to do something that one I didn't want to do, but also that I didn't have to do because it wasn't necessary. It didn't need to go there. So I always remember her. She I feel like she was the angel I needed in that room on that day, and God brought her along for me. So I always remember that labour. And then Zariah, my final one, she just came into the world really quickly. I mean, I remember being on the phone to you that morning, just saying, "Oh, I'm feeling stuff. I'm feeling stuff." And you were the one who said, get the contractions counter, start counting your contractions and everything else. Started counting my contractions, went and got my nails done, went and changed the tyres on my car, went about my day, got home and was really feeling the contractions. And then the contractions counter was saying, go to the hospital. And Margaret was calling me and just going, right, go to the hospital, get to the hospital now. My husband was just like, don't go to the hospital, I'll come first, or don't drive. So then eventually Margaret was just like, just get an Uber, get a cab, don't wait for your
Honestly,
husband,
I
just
was
get a
like,
cab.
you don't want to be level 10 pain at home, waiting for your husband to come home. He's like, I've just parked in the car.
Exactly. So I got to the hospital. About 20 minutes later, Tolu got there. And they were kind of checking the baby, monitoring the baby. Then they did the actual check on me just to see how far along I was. And so at the time, obviously, I've been induced for two labours prior, so I don't know what natural labour feels like. I don't know what spontaneous labour feels like. So I'm thinking, you're just going to send me home. So it is what it is. I'm prepared to be here for days. So I was just saying to my husband, don't call anybody. We're going to get sent home in a few days, in a few hours, or I'm just going to be asked to check my bag in. There's no rush. So he was all there like, let me call my brother to come and get the boys. I was saying, don't bother. There's no rush. There's no point. You'll go get the boys. They checked me and they just said, actually, you're 7 centimeters dilated. And I looked at my husband and thought, oh God, okay.
I thought, yeah,
So they
no.
just said, right, we're moving you straight to the delivery. suite. Told we had to sort out childcare and someone to pick up the kids, and yeah, within an hour? Was it an hour?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got to the delivery suite, and
Baby came
I
before the
had
kids
gas and
finished at
air.
school.
Pardon?
Zariah came before the kids finished at school.
Yeah. Before 14:44 exactly is when she came. Used gas and air, did a lot of pushing, and then yeah, she entered the world really quickly. Smoothest delivery, quickest delivery. So yeah, so I always say Zariah was my easiest. None of them have been easy, but Zariah was the easiest one and the smoothest one of all of them. And like you said, going back to what you said at the start of this, which was actually why are we saying this and why are we talking about this? And what advice would we give somebody? And I think my advice is still around one, have a plan, but just be prepared for that plan to go out of the window. And two, have someone there to advocate for you. And I always think with having your husband there is one thing, but a husband is or your partner in whichever sense. I always find that sometimes they get so lost in the feeling of I'm trying to make sure my partner's okay, but I also want my baby to be okay. So I feel like their voices, and in my experience anyway, I feel like his voice wasn't always the loudest because he was just always in a panic of I'm worried about everybody in the room. So if there is a doctor that you've got a really great relationship with, or a midwife who can kind of speak, who you've managed to kind of build a relationship with, and they can advocate for you, that's wonderful. Or if you've got a third party person who can come in the room. I know a lot of people have been using doulas and stuff like that during delivery as well
Absolutely.
instead, and have been hiring them. There's one lady that I follow on Instagram, their family, the Pello family, they're brilliant. And she put her birth story up, and she delivered at home, and she had the midwife came, but also she had a separate doula who was helping her deliver. And I think that's where the road that a lot of people are going down, just so they feel like they've got a bit of control when everything is out of control. So I guess that would be my advice. Just make sure that you've got someone else in that room for you who knows you well enough to be able to say, actually, this is what she wants, and let's explore that before we jump ahead, if that's possible.
If that's
Always
possible.
the thing of if that's possible.
Absolutely. And talking about dads, so the birth trauma inquiry has made some recommendations which will be available online. And one of the key recommendations is that to provide support for fathers and ensure a nominated birth partner is continuously informed and updated during labour and post delivery. I think it is essential for them to provide support for dads. So in both of these experiences, dads have been front and present in both of our experiences the whole entire time. Sometimes helpless, mostly helpless, lack of information to them, and also they are not doctors or midwives or doulas, they are dads, so it's going to be a very different experience. I think they need support prior, and I think they need support during, and I think they need support after, and I do think that they have their own traumatic stories to tell as they are
Absolutely.
watching the one person that they love in the world trying to deliver another person who they love just as much and will love just as much, and they're torn between the two. I want my wife or my partner to come through this happy and healthy, and also I want to have a baby at the end of it as well to take home. I think for fathers we underestimate how much trauma can be involved in them being present during that experience. Another recommendation from the report is a new maternity commissioner who would report directly to the Prime Minister, along with ensuring safe levels of staffing during birth. I think having a minister who is responsible for this, and not just someone who's just a talking head, but someone who can take action and walk around wards and find out what is required, and making sure that staffing levels are correct in every maternity situation. I think the one positive about this inquiry, it's an all-party parliamentary group on it. So it's not about Labour, Conservative, Liberal, Democrat.
Yes.
It's not about Green Party. It's not party political or driven. It's about all parties coming together to recognise that there is a genuine issue in regards to maternity, and care for women who are having births or thinking of having children. And I think there are a lot of women out there who are still in the healing process. You heal physically in terms of your scars, wherever they may
Yeah.
be, but also you also have to heal emotionally. And I think
100%.
it's so important that women are able, even if it is a traumatic birth, sometimes a birth will always be traumatic, no matter how you are planning it and what happens. It may be traumatic, but actually it's the healing process afterwards, and recognizing that women need help on that healing process. I think doulas are really important, and I regret not having a doula. But I think what happened is I was lured into a false sense of security after my first birth, and thinking, oh, it was so good, that actually I think the state of the NHS in the UK and the maternity wards in the UK has had a significant decline for
100%.
since both of us had our baby. So the one thing I was going to mention is I had a folder called Colourful Birth when I had eczema. So this folder just is about providing more positive and beneficial outcomes for women of colour. It's funny, although I had that folder, I don't believe that I had a better experience because I was carrying that folder. But I think you were saying that the women who have campaigned to have it, actually there's a purpose behind it.
Yeah, so I remember because I follow a lady on Instagram, and they run the campaign, so it's 5 times more, and it's bringing to the forefront the conversation around actually black, brown, ethnic minority women have very different experiences and are treated very differently when it comes to birth and labour. Pregnancy, birth, labour, birth. And the whole aim of the packs was to actually show the statistics, but also just to bring to the forefront of the midwife, yourselves, whoever's carrying it, and just to have that conversation around actually black and brown women are 5 times more likely to suffer from a traumatic experience or suffer death or loss of a child during labour, and that's what it was highlighting. And because when you look at a lot of the packs and stuff like that, a lot of the statistics are based around white women. We're in the UK, so there's still a lot more studies focused on white women experiences, and not enough done on the experiences of black, brown, ethnic minority women. And that was just, I guess it's a drop in the ocean, but it's a start.
I think it's an
Around
important
that
start.
conversation.
It is an
Yeah, and
important
they're on
start.
Instagram. The campaign is called 5 times more. They've done a lot of work in Parliament, with members of Parliament and everything else. They've been on TV more recently when the birth trauma came out as well, talking about their work. And I guess they're also trying to tie in the work that they're doing and what they're trying to highlight into the wider topic again, which is now being spoken about, because when black, brown, ethnic minority women have been saying about their experiences and their trauma during birth and labour for a really long time, and now this inquiry has come out. So I guess what 5 times more are trying to do is bring it together rather than saying actually these are polling conversations. No, it's all one conversation.
It is.
It
It
is
is.
all about women's negative experiences, but let's also make sure that we are including ethnic minority women in that conversation as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And so the all-party parliamentary group on the birth trauma put forward 12 recommendations. Those recommendations include to recruit, train and retain more midwives, obstetricians and anaesthetists to ensure safe levels of staffing, respect mothers' choices around giving birth and access to pain relief, commitment to tackle inequalities in maternity care for ethnic minorities, particularly Black and Asian women, and also universal access to specialist mental health services to end the postcode lottery across the UK. So those are a few of the recommendations. The final report will be coming out. I think from my perspective, it would be, I think you mentioned it previously, try and build a relationship with whoever is there in the hospital. And we know that people will change shifts. Nurses will come, nurses will go, midwives will come, midwives will go. Someone may be on your shift who checked your like blood pressure, blah, blah, last night. They may not be on your shift when you deliver the baby the next day. I think it's important to communicate to all of them, whether they want to listen or not, what your wishes are, maybe while you're still calm or while you've just been checked into the hospital. If you are not able to do that, although a birth plan is, they may not work, you might not be able to use a birth plan, write a birth plan so at least somebody in that room has access to it, and your husband or partner or birthing partner can see it and use it as a guide. I think it's also important that you get, if you can, while you're in that room, get a second opinion. If one doctor is saying something else, ask for a midwife. If that midwife is, or if that midwife is saying something, ask for an obstetrician, ask for a guide, ask for anybody separate to come in and just give you, if you have the time, to give you a second opinion. I also think, don't be afraid to say stuff as well. If there's any time to speak up, it is that point to say how you feel. And also, it's not easy to give birth, but there's lots of support out there, and we will mention them. I will write them in this episode, and I'll put them on the screen for you. Lots of places where you can go for support before, during, after your childbirth, and we just want to wish everybody out there the best in terms of your delivery, your birth, and having and growing your family. It is a wonderful experience. We hope it continues to be a wonderful experience for you guys out there.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to this special episode of Pulling an All-Nighter podcast, and we will speak to you soon.
Bye.